Thomas Whitaker threw the photograph against the wall of his ranch house on a Thursday night, and it hit the wood so hard the frame cracked clean in half. He stood there breathing, staring at the broken glass on the floor at Margaret's face, smiling up at him from the wreckage, and he felt something inside his chest collapse, the way old timber collapses. Slow at first, then all at once with nothing left standing. He had kept that photograph on the mantel for 6 years. 6 years of looking at it every morning before he walked outside to work. 6 years of saying goodnight to it before he blew out the lantern. And tonight, for reasons he could not entirely explain, he could not stand to look at it anymore. Not because he had stopped loving her, but because loving her was the only thing he had left, and it was eating him alive. He was waiting again tomorrow. He always waited on Fridays. And he did not know how much longer his heart could survive it. If you are watching this story right now, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel and follow along with me to the very end. Because what happens next on that platform is something I believe will stay with you for a long time. Leave a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Every single comment means the world to me. Now let us go back to Willow Creek, Kansas, 1886, and let me tell you everything that happened. Kansas Territory. The town of Willow Creek was not a cruel place, not exactly. It was simply an honest place. And in an honest place, people said what they believed without troubling themselves too long about whether it was kind. They believed that a man who worked hard deserved his land. They believed that a woman who kept her house clean deserved her reputation. And they believed, without saying it too plainly, but believing it nonetheless, that certain people deserved more consideration than others, and that the way a person looked told you something true about who they were. Thomas Whitaker had lived among these people his entire life, and he had never once questioned their arithmetic. He was 38 years old. He had built his ranch from raw ground, using his own hands and every dollar he had ever saved. He was lean and sun-darkened from decades of outdoor work, with the kind of face that did not invite conversation, but earned respect. Men in Willow Creek tipped their hats to Thomas. Women trusted him instinctively. The sheriff had once asked him to serve as a deputy during a difficult stretch, and Thomas had declined only because he could not leave his cattle unattended for that many consecutive days. How as by every measure, the town applied a good man. And 6 years ago, Thomas Whitaker's wife had died on a winter train, somewhere between here and the Missouri border, and something inside him had simply stopped. Not broken, not shattered. He had kept working. He had kept eating and sleeping and managing his land with the same efficiency he had always maintained, but stopped, like a clock that still sits on the shelf but no longer moves its hands. Margaret Ellen Whitaker had been 31 years old when she died. She had been small and quick-moving with dark hair. She always pinned up too loosely so that pieces of it were constantly escaping and falling across her face. She laughed easily. She argued with him about things that did not matter and yielded on things that did, and he had never quite worked out whether that was wisdom or a particular kind of stubbornness. She had loved this town the way Thomas loved his land, not because it was perfect, but because it was hers. Every winter, Margaret traveled east to care for her mother, who had been sick for years with something the doctors never named properly. She was gone for 2 months, sometimes 3, and every Friday she came home on the afternoon train. Thomas drove his horse to the station every single Friday she was away. He bought a platform ticket. He sat on the second bench from the east side, the one closest to where the first-class car stopped, and he waited. Margaret always ran across the platform. She said walking was too slow when she had missed him all week. She ran across the platform and threw herself at him with a kind of joyful recklessness that embarrassed him in front of half the town, and he had never once minded, not even a little. Even when Chester Howell from the feed store laughed and said a grown man shouldn't let himself be tackled by a woman in public, Thomas had turned and looked at Chester Howell with the particular expression that ended conversations, and Chester had never mentioned it again. The last winter, Margaret went east. She sent him letters as she always did. 2 letters in November, 1 in December. Then nothing. He waited for a Friday that January, when the snow was coming down sideways, and the train arrived late, and he stood on that platform in the cold for 40 minutes past the usual time. She was not on it. He waited the following Friday, and the Friday after that. On the fifth Friday, a man he had never met stepped off the train holding a letter and looking around the platform with the uncomfortable expression of someone who had been given a task he wished he could have refused. He found Thomas on the bench and sat beside him and explained with genuine sorrow and many apologies that Margaret Whittaker had died of pneumonia on the 3rd day of January. That she had been well cared for. That her passing had been peaceful. That she had asked him, this stranger, this kind-faced man who traveled for a railroad company and had happened to be in the right place, to please carry the letter west and give it to her husband, who she said would be waiting at the station on a Friday afternoon. Thomas accepted the letter. He thanked the man. He sat on the bench until the next train departed, which was nearly 2 hours later. Then he went home, fed his cattle, and put the letter in the top drawer of the desk in his study, where it remained unopened for 3 months. He did not need to open it. He already knew everything she would have said. He returned to the station the following Friday, and the Friday after that, and every Friday for the next 6 years. By now, everyone in Willow Creek knew about Thomas Whittaker's Friday ritual in the way that a small town knows everything thoroughly and with considerable opinion. The theories were numerous and detailed. Old Doc Hennessy maintained that Thomas was simply a man of habit, and that habit was the last defense against grief. Betty Calloway at the dry goods store believed he was waiting for a woman who had left him for a man back east, and that one day she would return in shame, and Thomas would either take her back or turn her away, and either outcome would be deeply satisfying to witness. The Garner brothers, who ran the livery, thought he was waiting for a business partner who had cheated him out of money and would eventually show his face when he ran out of options. Nobody thought to ask Thomas what he was actually doing, because Thomas had the kind of silence around him that discouraged questions. Clara Bennett arrived in Willow Creek in the first week of September on a Tuesday morning on the same train that Thomas ignored every week because it was not a Friday train. She was 27 years old. She carried 2 bags, a worn leather satchel, and a letter of recommendation from the postmaster of a town in Indiana, who had written 3 paragraphs about her competence and 1 sentence about her character, which he said was beyond reproach. She had accepted the position of station clerk at Willow Creek Station because the station master, Mr. Aldous Prentice, had interviewed her entirely by letter, and therefore hired her based on her handwriting, her arithmetic, and the way she organized her correspondence, none of which told him anything about what she looked like. Clara was a large woman. She had been a large woman her entire life. At close to 300 pounds, she occupied space in a way that made people in small towns notice her immediately, and she had spent 27 years learning exactly what kind of noticing that was. It was not admiration, it was not interest. It was the particular kind of attention that seeks to confirm a judgment already made, eyes that swept over her quickly and then moved on, as if the act of looking had satisfied some curiosity that was not in any meaningful sense about her as a person. She had been laughed at in school. She had been passed over for positions she was better qualified for than the women who were hired instead. She had watched men at dances look past her as if she were furniture, and she had smiled pleasantly and pretended it did not hollow her out a little each time. And when her parents died, her mother in the spring, her father 4 months later, which she believed was grief more than illness, she had packed her 2 bags and her satchel and taken the first position offered to her in a town far enough away that nobody's face would remind her of the life she was leaving behind. Willow Creek, Kansas. Population 840. She arrived on a Tuesday, and by Thursday morning, she already knew that Willow Creek was not in fact a different kind of town. Martha Hale, who ran the boarding house where Clara rented a room, was a woman who believed she was being kind when she said things like, "You have such a pretty face, dear," in the tone that meant she considered the face an exception to a general rule she was too polite to state directly. The woman at the dry goods store followed Clara with her eyes in a way that Clara recognized as the particular vigilance people reserved for those they had already decided were somehow less trustworthy than average. 2 men outside the barbershop laughed when she walked past, and she heard one of them say something she chose not to fully process, because she had learned early that fully processing certain things was a form of harm she could choose to decline. She unpacked her 2 bags in her room at Martha Hale's boarding house, placed her father's account ledger on the bedside table, because looking at his handwriting sometimes felt like talking to him, and reminded herself of something her mother had told her when she was 9 years old and had come home crying from school. "Clara," her mother had said, holding her face in both hands, "there is not a single thing wrong with you. There is something wrong with anyone who makes you feel otherwise. You remember that. You hold on to that. Don't you let anybody talk you out of it." She had held on to it. For 18 years, she had held on to it. She started work at the station on Friday morning, and that was the day she first noticed Thomas Whitaker. She was still learning the ticket window, the way the drawer stuck on the left side, the particular speed at which the receipt stamps needed to be pressed to leave a clear impression when she heard boots on the platform outside. Deliberate and unhurried, the walk of a man who had made this trip many times before. She looked through the window. Howe was tall, well built in the way of men who worked with their bodies rather than their vanity. Clean shirt, clean boots, hat worn straight. He walked to the second bench from the east side and sat down with the practiced ease of a man returning to a familiar chair. He did not look at the ticket window. He did not look at her. He faced the tracks, folded his hands in his lap, and waited. The 412 arrived 12 minutes early because the wind was strong out of the north. Clara watched through the window as passengers stepped down, a merchant carrying sample cases, 2 women in traveling clothes, a family with 3 children who were visibly exhausted, an older man moving carefully with a cane. Thomas watched each face. She could not see his expression clearly through the glass, but she could see his stillness. The absolute careful stillness of a man who has trained himself not to let his hoping show too openly. The passengers crossed the platform. The conductor called all aboard. 2 more passengers climbed on. The train pulled out. Thomas remained on the bench for perhaps 4 minutes after the train was gone. Then he rose, straightened his hat, and walked back across the platform the same way he had come, deliberate, unhurried, giving nothing away. Clara watched him untie his horse from the post outside the station door. She watched him ride south toward the open land beyond town. She thought about him all evening, not in a romantic sense, or not only in a romantic sense, though she would not have admitted even that much to herself at the time. She thought about him the way she thought about puzzles her father used to bring home from the hardware store, mechanical things with interlocking pieces that didn't reveal their logic until you held them from exactly the right angle. What was that man waiting for? The following Friday he came again. 3:47 this time. She had begun watching for him. Same bench. Same stillness. Same careful attention to every face that stepped off the 412. Same empty walk back to his horse when the platform cleared. The Friday after that it rained hard, and Clara thought surely he would not come. The rain was the kind that came in sideways and made the platform awning useless and soaked through a coat in minutes. Thomas Whitaker arrived at 3:45 in the rain, sat on the bench, and waited. He had turned his coat collar up. That was the only concession he made to the weather. When the train came and went and the platform emptied, he sat for a moment in the rain, looking at the tracks, and something in the line of his shoulders made Clara's chest ache in a way she could not immediately account for. She had seen grief before. She had sat with her mother in the final weeks and watched someone she loved diminish, and she had held her father's hand in a hospital room that smelled of carbolic and resignation. But this was a different kind of grief. This was grief that had made itself a home, that had found a routine and a schedule and a particular bench, and made itself comfortable because the alternative, the grief that wandered without a destination, was somehow worse. She understood that. More than she might have expected, she understood it. She pulled her coat off the hook by the door, walked out onto the platform, and sat beside him. The rain was cold. The bench was wet. She sat down anyway. Thomas turned to look at her with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was clearly surprised. She had not planned what she was going to say. She said the first true thing that came to her. "Who are you waiting for?" He looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then he looked back at the tracks. "That," he said quietly, "is the first time anybody in this town has asked me that." "I'm not from this town," she said. "I've only been here 3 weeks." Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite. but an acknowledgement that this answer was somehow more satisfying than it should have been. He reached inside his coat. Clara expected she did not know what she expected. A ticket, a document, something official and explanatory. He pulled out a photograph. It was small, the size of a man's palm, worn at the edges from years of handling. A young woman stood beside a station bench. This bench, she realized, looking at the familiar lines of the wood and the station wall behind it. The woman was laughing at something just outside the frame. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. She looked like someone who was always slightly in motion, even when she was standing still. Thomas held the photograph for a moment without speaking. "Her name was Margaret," he said. "She was my wife." Clara did not say she was sorry because sorry was a word people used when they did not know what else to say, and she had heard it so many times in the months after her parents died that it had worn down to meaninglessness. She waited instead, which was a different and harder thing. Every winter she traveled east to care for her mother, Thomas said. She was gone for months, and every Friday she came home on the afternoon train. He paused. She always ran across this platform. She said walking was too slow. He put the photograph away. She died of pneumonia 6 years ago, January. She never came home. "But you kept coming," Clara said. "I kept coming." She looked at the tracks where the last of the train's smoke was dissolving against the gray sky. "Why?" she asked. It was not a challenging question. She genuinely wanted to know. Thomas was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "Because this is the last place where I can still remember exactly how it felt to be the person she was running toward." Clara did not say anything after that. She did not need to. She sat beside him in the rain for another 10 minutes until the cold had properly settled into both of them. And then she stood up, nodded once, and went back inside. That night in her room at Martha Hale's boarding house, she sat on her bed with her father's ledger open in her lap, not reading it, just feeling the weight of it. And she thought about a man who drove to a train station every Friday to sit alone on a bench in whatever weather came, because it was the last place where he felt chosen. She had never been chosen. Not once. Not like that. And she thought quietly, without any particular drama. The way you think a thing that is simply true. That maybe she understood Thomas Whitaker better than anyone in this town had thought to try. The next Friday, she put a cup of coffee on the far end of the bench before Thomas arrived. She placed it there at 3:40 and went back inside without waiting to see if he noticed. She watched from the ticket window. Thomas arrived at 3:44. He stopped when he saw the cup. He stood looking at it for a moment, then sat down and picked it up and drank from it slowly. And the way he held it with both hands, like warmth, was a thing worth holding on to. Carefully, made her feel something that she did not immediately have a name for. He left without looking at the ticket window. But the following Friday, he stopped at the window on his way in. "The coffee," he said. "Was that you?" "I make it fresh every afternoon," she said. "There's always extra." He looked at her for a moment. "Thank you, Miss Bennett," she said. "Clara Bennett." "Thomas Whitaker." He touched the brim of his hat. "Much obliged, Miss Bennett." She had been called Miss before. But something about the way he said it, without the slight uptick of surprise, or the faint hesitation that suggested the word was a courtesy, being extended against some internal resistance, made it sound different. He said it like it was simply her name. She watched him walk to the bench and thought that small things mattered more than people gave them credit for. The coffees continued. And gradually, not all at once, but in the way that rivers cut through stone gradually and irreversibly, the silence on the platform began to change. He started arriving a few minutes earlier. He stopped sometimes at the window before going to the bench. Small observations, not quite conversation. The weather was turning, the rails were due for inspection. He'd lost 2 calves to the cold this week, and it put him behind on his count. Clara responded in kind. The morning freight had been delayed 3 days running. There was a dispute between 2 ranchers over a land boundary, and both of them had sent telegrams through the station, and she had done her best not to read too carefully, but some things were hard to avoid. He almost smiled at that. She noticed and pretended not to. The real conversation started 6 weeks after that first rainy Friday. It was an ordinary afternoon, no particular weather, and Thomas had come to the bench, and Clara had brought 2 coffees instead of 1. She hadn't planned it, she'd simply done it and sat down beside him again without asking permission, and he hadn't suggested she go back inside, and somehow that was the beginning. He asked about Indiana, about her family. She told him about her father's hardware store, about learning to keep accounts before she was 10, because her father said a woman who could not manage money was a woman at someone else's mercy. She told him about her mother's garden, and her mother's voice, and the way her mother had a particular laugh for stupid jokes that was entirely different from her laugh for genuinely funny things. She did not tell him about the years of cruelty in Indiana. Not yet. That was a story for a different kind of trust. He told her about building his ranch, about the first winter when he had almost no resources and had survived on cornmeal and stubbornness, and the conviction that the land would eventually yield to someone patient enough to earn it. About Margaret, a little not the grief parts, but the living parts. The way she had once talked him out of a bad business deal by asking questions he couldn't answer. The way she had planted a kitchen garden, even though the soil on the east side of the house was terrible for growing, because she said the challenge was the point. She was not a woman who did things the easy way, Thomas said, even when the easy way was available. Was that difficult? Clara asked. He thought about it honestly, the way she had noticed he thought about most things. Sometimes, he said, and then she'd be right, and I'd remember why I married her. Clara laughed before she could stop herself. It was a real laugh, not the polished social laugh she produced for people she was trying not to frighten with the full weight of her personality. Thomas looked at her when she laughed. She felt the look and did not know what to do with it. The town noticed the platform conversations before Thomas or Clara did. Betty Calloway from the dry goods store mentioned it to Martha Hale. Martha Hale mentioned it at the church social. By the time the conversations had been happening for 2 months, half of Willow Creek had some opinion about them. The opinions were not generous. I don't know what Thomas Whitaker thinks he's doing, Clara heard one woman say to another outside the dry goods store one morning, not bothering to lower her voice. Sitting with that Bennett woman, like she's regular company. Maybe he's just being polite, the other woman said. Thomas has always been considerate. There's considerate, and then there's encouraging, the first woman said. A man in his position ought to be more careful about the wrong ideas he puts in certain people's heads. Clara kept walking. She had been walking past conversations like that her entire life. But that evening alone in her room, she put her father's ledger away and sat on the edge of her bed and felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite anger, a particular weariness that came from understanding all over again that she would never be in any place where she was simply a person before she was the size of the person. She thought about leaving. She thought about Denver, or perhaps somewhere farther, San Francisco maybe, though she had no connections there. She thought about packing her 2 bags and her satchel and disappearing from Willow Creek the same way she had appeared quietly on a train, leaving nothing behind. But then she thought about the coffee cup on the bench, and the way Thomas Whitaker said Miss like it was simply her name. And she unpacked those 2 bags in her mind and put them back under the bed and went to sleep. The 3rd month of their platform conversations, something shifted between them that Clara felt but could not have described precisely to anyone who asked. It was a Tuesday, not a Friday. Thomas had ridden into town for supplies and stopped at the station window on his way back, through which he had begun doing with increasing frequency. He told her that one of his senior ranch hands, a man named Doyle, who had been with him for 11 years, had given notice. He was going to California, had a sister out there who needed help. Thomas stood at the window with his supply list still in his hand, and looked like a man who was not entirely sure how to account for this particular loss, not devastated, but somehow diminished. "How many hands will you be short?" Clara asked. "1 through spring roundup at minimum." He folded the list. "Doyle managed the evening feeding rotation. I'll need to reconfigure the whole schedule." "Can I see your current rotation?" she asked. He looked at her with a mild surprise. "It's a livestock feeding schedule." "I manage schedules here, she said. "I reorganized the freight manifest system last month and cut the error rate in half. A cattle rotation is a calendar problem with a calorie budget attached. Let me look at it." There was a pause. Thomas reached into his coat pocket and unfolded a piece of paper covered in pencil notations and handed it to her through the window. She studied it for 90 seconds. "You have overlap here," she said, pointing. "These two men are doing adjacent sections at the same time. If you shift one of them an hour earlier and give the other his section, plus this quarter of the west pasture, you can cover Doyle's route with existing staff for the first 6 weeks. That gives you until early spring to hire without being behind on the schedule." Thomas stared at the paper. "That's—" He stopped. "I can write it out properly if you'd like," she said. "No," he said slowly. "No, I see it." He looked up at her. "How did you do that in a minute and a half?" "My father's store," she said. "He had 8 employees and a delivery route and a warehouse. I kept his books and his schedules for 7 years before he died. I know what inefficiency looks like." Thomas folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. He looked at her for a moment with an expression she had not seen on him before. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I owe you a better cup of coffee than the station provides." She felt warmth reach her face before she could prevent it. "The station coffee is adequate," she said. "It's terrible," he said, "and you know it." She pressed her lips together to stop the smile. He tipped his hat and rode home. She stood at the window after he left and thought that her father would have liked Thomas Whitaker considerably. That thought surprised her. She held on to it carefully, the way you hold on to things you are not yet sure you deserve. The Friday conversations continued through October into November, and by November they had become something that neither Thomas nor Clara had named because naming things changed them, and both of them were cautious people who had learned that certain kinds of change could not be undone. But the town had names for it. None of the names were kind. Clara heard them in pieces at the boarding house at the general store, in the way that certain conversations stopped when she entered a room and resumed when she left. She heard that people thought Thomas was making a fool of himself. She heard that people thought she was making a fool of herself in a different and more pathetic way. She heard the word ridiculous and the word shameful, and one word that she shut out before it fully formed because she knew what it was, and she did not have the energy that particular word required. She told herself it did not matter. Some mornings she believed it. The Saturday that changed everything was not a Friday, which was somehow appropriate, because the moments that change everything almost never arrive when you expect them. It was the first Saturday of December, a morning so cold that the water in the station's wash basin had a skin of ice across the top. Clara was working on the month-end freight ledger when the station door opened and 3 women entered who had clearly not come for tickets or telegrams. She recognized them from church. Mrs. Calloway in front, as always, flanked by 2 women whose names Clara had never learned because they had never offered them. "Miss Bennett," Mrs. Calloway said, with the tone of a woman delivering a kindness that had not been requested. "Good morning," Clara said. "We wanted to have a word with you." Mrs. Calloway settled her hands in front of her like a woman preparing to administer medicine. "About Thomas Whitaker." Clara set her pen down. "We've been watching," Mrs. Calloway continued, "and we're a little concerned. Not for our sake, you understand. For yours." "For mine," Clara said. "Thomas is a grieving man," Mrs. Calloway said. "He's been grieving for 6 years, and grief does things to people. Makes them reach out for comfort in ways that perhaps aren't entirely thought through." She paused to let this settle. "He's a good man, Thomas is," she continued. "A wonderful man. And we'd hate to see him make a mistake he couldn't take back. And we'd hate equally to see you well. To see you get your hopes up about something that isn't going to—" "I appreciate your concern," Clara said. Her voice was entirely even. She had made it entirely even through the application of 6 separate years of practice. "We just think," Mrs. Calloway said, "that it might be kinder in the long run for you to perhaps limit the time you spend on that platform, for both your sakes." Clara looked at Mrs. Calloway. She looked at her for long enough that Mrs. Calloway's certainty showed the first small signs of weathering. "I serve coffee on the platform," Clara said, "to a customer who has purchased a platform ticket for 6 consecutive years. The coffee is complimentary and falls within station hospitality practices." If you have a concern about station policy, you're welcome to write to the station master in Dodge City. She picked up her pen. Good morning. Mrs. Calloway opened her mouth. She closed it. She led her two companions back out the door without another word. Clara looked at the freight ledger. The numbers blurred slightly. She blinked until they cleared. She thought, I will not cry about this. I have not cried about things like this since I was 15 years old, and I am not going to start again now. She did not cry. But that evening in her room, she sat for a long time with her father's ledger and thought about the letter from Denver that had arrived the previous week and that she had left unanswered in the top drawer of her desk. A wealthy household, a position managing accounts, a salary larger than she had ever received, a city large enough that no one would follow her from their dry goods store to her place of employment to inform her of the limits of her reasonable expectations. She thought about it for a long time. She did not make a decision that night, but she left the drawer unlocked. The following Friday, Thomas arrived at 3:42 instead of his usual 3:45. He stopped at the window. You all right? He said. She looked up. Fine. Why? He looked at her with that careful directness. He had the kind that didn't press, but didn't pretend either. You look like you haven't slept, he said. December weather, she said. The boarding house walls are thin. He accepted this without comment, though she did not entirely believe he accepted it. He went to the bench. She brought the coffee. She sat beside him. They were both quiet for a while, in the way they had become comfortable being quiet, which was the way of people who had learned they did not need to fill every silence with something. Then Thomas said, without looking away from the tracks, Did the Calloway woman come to see you? Clara went still. What makes you ask that? She said. Because she came to see me on Thursday, he said. And her expression when I didn't agree with her read as a woman who had another errand planned. Clara looked at her coffee cup. What did she say to you? She asked. Several things that were not her business presented as concern for mine. He paused. I told her that my affairs were my own, and thanked her for her interest. She told me, Clara said carefully, that I should limit my time on the platform. Thomas turned to look at her. And, he said, and I told her to contact the station master in Dodge City if she had a policy concern. Thomas looked at her for a moment. Then he did something Clara had not seen him do once in 3 months. He smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the particular smile of a man who has been given more pleasant news than he expected. Good, he said. He turned back to the tracks. The train arrived 4 minutes later, and he watched the passengers step down with the same careful attention he always gave them, and when the platform cleared, he sat for a moment in the ordinary way. Then he said without particular drama, I want you to know something, Miss Bennet. What's that? She said. He did not look at her. He looked at the tracks. The people in this town are not poor judges of character, he said, but they are poor judges of worth. There is a considerable difference between those two things, and I have been watching them confuse the two for going on 4 decades. He paused. I want you to know that I am aware of the difference. Clara did not say anything. She did not trust her voice entirely at that moment. Thomas rose, straightened his hat, and nodded once. Same time next week, he said. He walked back to his horse. She sat on the bench alone for a long time after he left in the cold December air, with the train tracks empty before her, and the sound of Willow Creek settling into its evening routines around her, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the particular feeling of ground under your feet after a long time walking in mud. Something solid, something that might if she let it hold her weight. The ground held her weight through December. That was the thing. Clara came back to in the quiet of her room at Martha Hale's boarding house on the nights when the wind came off the prairie and found every gap in the walls, and reminded her that Kansas in winter was not a place designed for comfort. The ground held. She had felt it under her feet after that last Friday conversation, that particular solidity of something real, and she had not yet found reason to doubt it. She did not permit herself to call it more than it was. She was a practical woman. She had been raised by a practical man in a practical store where the accounts either balanced or they did not, and there was no romantic interpretation of a ledger that made the numbers different. She applied the same discipline to her own interior life. What existed between her and Thomas Whitaker was a series of Friday afternoon conversations on a station platform, a shared cup of coffee, and 2 instances in which he had said something that reached her in a place she generally kept locked. That was the inventory. She was not going to record more than she had. But she left the Denver letter unanswered for another week. And then another. Thomas came on a Tuesday in the 2nd week of December, not for tickets, but because he had a telegraph to send to a cattle buyer in Abilene, and he stood at the window while she transmitted it, and then stood there a moment longer than the transaction required. "My foreman thinks the east pasture fence is failing in 3 sections," he said. "I've got a man riding out to assess it tomorrow. Before the hard freeze," she said. "Right. If the ground locks before we get the posts reset, we lose the pasture until March, and the cattle have to double up on the west side." He paused. "Which creates its own problems." "Feed distribution," she said immediately. "You'll run short by February if you're running double density on the west pasture from December." He looked at her. "You got that fast?" "My father overwintered hogs one year when a fence failed," she said. "He lost money he didn't recover until the following summer. He talked about it for the rest of his life as the mistake a man only makes once if he's paying attention." She set her pencil down. "Do you want me to run the numbers? I can estimate your feed requirements against current stock and tell you whether you have the reserves or not." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'd be grateful." She had the estimates written out by the following morning. He came by mid-afternoon to collect them, read them twice, standing at the window, and did not say anything for long enough that she wondered if she had made an error. Then he folded the paper and put it in his coat. "You're better at this than the man I pay to do it," he said. "I haven't seen his work," she said. "Trust me," Thomas said. He left. She watched him go and thought about the fence posts and the frozen ground and the feed reserves, which was a considerably safer thing to think about than the expression on his face when he folded the paper. 2 days later, she received a letter from Mrs. Whitmore in Denver, inquiring politely but with unmistakable firmness whether Miss Bennett intended to accept the position as they had another candidate waiting and could not hold the offer indefinitely past the new year. Clara read the letter twice. She placed it in the drawer. She did not answer it that day. What she thought about instead was what Thomas had said about the distinction between judging character and judging worth, and how few people in her life had ever demonstrated awareness that the two were different things. Her father had known. Her mother had known. And now apparently a rancher who drove to the train station every Friday in all weather to sit alone on a bench and remember a dead woman knew it too. She could not decide if this was fortune or cruelty. Possibly it was both. Friday came, and with it, a cold that settled into the platform boards and climbed straight through the soles of her boots. She had the coffee ready by 3:38. She was at the window when Thomas arrived, and she noticed something she had not noticed before, that he paused for just a fraction of a second outside the station door before crossing to the bench, as if gathering himself. As if whatever he was doing here cost him something, and he had made peace with the cost, but it still required a moment's accounting before he began. She had never seen him do that before. Or perhaps she had, and she had not been paying the right kind of attention. She brought the 2 coffees out, sat beside him. They were quiet for a while. "Did the fence assessment come back?" she asked. 3 sections failing too critical," he said. "We'll get them before the freeze if the weather holds another week. And the feed, ordered extra from the Garner Supply Depot in Dodge, comes in Thursday." He held his coffee with both hands. "Because of your numbers." "Your numbers," she said. "I just organized them." "Nobody had organized them before," he said. She did not know how to answer that, so she looked at the tracks instead, and they were both quiet again. And then the train arrived, and Thomas watched the passengers with the same careful attention. This particular patience, this refusal to give up the ritual, even though he understood fully what the ritual was and what it wasn't. And when the platform cleared, he sat for a moment in the cold. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer me honestly, even if you think the answer will be uncomfortable." Clara looked at him. "All right," she said. "Do you intend to stay in Willow Creek?" The question was direct. Thomas was always direct, not aggressive, not pressuring, just facing a thing squarely and expecting the same in return. Clara was quiet for a moment. "There is a position in Denver," she said. "I haven't answered the letter yet." Thomas nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he had suspected. "Is it a better opportunity than this?" he asked. "Financially, considerably." She paused. "The household that's offering is wealthy. The salary is more than 3 times what the station pays." "I see." "They've been waiting on my answer for several weeks," she said. "I need to give them one soon." Thomas looked at the empty tracks. "Can I ask why you haven't answered?" Clara thought about how to say the true thing. "Because I haven't finished deciding," she said. He turned to look at her. "What are you deciding between—" She held her coffee cup. Outside, the wind picked up, and the station eaves made a low sound that was almost like a voice. "Between what's sensible," she said quietly, "and what I'm not ready to leave." Thomas did not say anything for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful, and even in the way of a man who is aware that the next thing he says will either open a door or close one, and is not entirely sure which outcome he is hoping for. "I have not said to you the things I perhaps should have said," he said. "I am aware of that. I am not a man who says things easily. Margaret used to tell me that communicating with me was like trying to read a newspaper that had been folded wrong. All the words were there, but the arrangement was inconvenient." The corner of his mouth moved. She was not wrong. Clara felt something happen in her chest. Not the hollow feeling she was accustomed to. Something different. Something that was almost painful in the way that feeling returns to a numb place, sharp and real, and not entirely unwelcome. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "No," he said. "But there are things that are owed regardless of debt." He looked at her. "I want you to know that the weeks you've sat on this bench have been—" He stopped, started again. "I spend 11 hours a day working a ranch by myself. I eat alone. I make decisions alone. I carry the weight of the whole operation alone, because that is the situation I am in, and I am not a man who complains about situations he chose." He paused. "Fridays have been different. For the first time in a long time, Fridays have been different. And I am telling you that plainly, because I think you deserve to have it said plainly." Clara looked at the empty tracks. She thought about her father's store, about the accounts that balanced and the ones that didn't, about the clean simplicity of numbers compared to the impossible arithmetic of this particular moment. "Thomas," she said. He looked at her. "I'll answer the Denver letter next week," she said. He nodded once. "That's fair," he said. The train came the following Friday, and a woman stepped off it wearing a blue traveling coat and carrying a valise. And she did not look anything like Margaret. She was taller, older, moving with the weariness of someone who had been on trains for many days. But she reminded Clara of something, some quality of arrival, of returning to a place where someone was waiting. She watched Thomas watch the woman cross the platform. She watched his face not change. She had seen grief before, but she had not seen it like this, so domesticated, so quietly integrated into an ordinary life, sitting beside a man on a bench, like an old companion he had made his peace with. It did not make her sorry for him exactly. It made her understand something she had not been able to put words to before. He was not broken. He had been broken, and he had rebuilt himself. And what she was looking at was the rebuilt version, functional and capable and real, but rebuilt with the seams visible to anyone who looked closely enough. She had been rebuilt too, just from different material with different seams. The week before Christmas, Thomas brought her a small package when he came for his Tuesday telegram. Clara looked at it. "What is this?" she said. "It's a gift," he said in the tone of a man explaining something that should be obvious. "I can see that. What is it a gift for Christmas?" he said, "which is 8 days away, in case the station calendar has not been updated." She looked at him. He looked back with an expression of complete innocence that she was almost certain he had manufactured specifically for this moment. She opened it carefully. She was a person who opened packages carefully, which had always seemed to her like basic respect for whoever had done the wrapping. Inside was a leather-bound account book, small enough to fit in a coat pocket, with her name stamped on the cover in plain block letters. The leather was good quality dark brown soft, in a way that suggested someone had selected it with some thought. She looked at it for a moment. "It's for keeping track of things," Thomas said. "You mentioned your father's ledger. I thought—" He stopped. "I thought a woman who works with numbers the way you do ought to have a proper book of her own." Clara looked up at him. She was absolutely not going to cry in the station ticket window in front of Thomas Whitaker. She was also fighting a battle she was fairly certain she was losing. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. Thomas nodded. He picked up his telegram receipt and turned to go. "Thomas," she said. He turned back. "I answered the Denver letter," she said. He went very still. "I declined the position," she said. "I wrote back this morning." Thomas looked at her across the ticket counter, and she watched something move through his expression that was too complex for her to name. In the moment, relief and caution, and something that was not quite hope, but was closely related to it. "I see," he said very quietly. "I told them I had commitments in Willow Creek that I wasn't prepared to leave," she said. "Which is the truth, even if it's a complicated truth." Thomas held his telegram receipt. Outside, the wind had picked up and was pushing something loose along the street. "Miss Bennett," he said, "would you permit me to call on you, not here at the station, properly?" Clara held the account book. The words settled over her slowly. The way snow settled quietly, without announcing itself, changing the shape of everything it touched. "I would permit that," she said. He nodded, touched the brim of his hat, left without another word. Clara stood at the ticket window for a long moment after he was gone. She opened the account book to the first page, which was blank and clean and waiting. She thought about what her father would have said. She thought he would have said finally. Thomas called on her that Sunday, arriving at Martha Hale's boarding house at precisely 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which was the time he had told her he would arrive. He was wearing his good coat. His hat was brushed. He was carrying nothing because he had asked her in advance whether she would like flowers or a tin of something sweet, and she had told him she would like neither, and that showing up on time was sufficient, and he had shown up on time. Martha Hale opened the door for him with an expression that suggested she had not expected this development and was not yet sure whether she approved of it. Thomas said, "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hale," politely and without particular concern for her approval, and Clara appeared at the top of the stairs in her good gray dress, and Martha Hale found herself irrelevant to the transaction and withdrew. They walked through town in the December cold. Not touching, they were not there yet, and both of them understood it, but close in the way of people who have learned the particular distance that means something without requiring explanation. Several people saw them. Several people would have things to say about it by sundown. Neither of them mentioned this. They walked to the edge of town, where the road opened up toward the south, and the land spread out flat and enormous under the winter sky. And Thomas told her about the ranch. Not the daily operations she already knew from his Tuesday visits, but the larger thing, the original idea of it, what he had wanted when he was a young man standing on raw ground and trying to imagine a future. "I wanted something that would last past me," he said. "Not children necessarily, though Margaret and I had talked about it, but something that would show I had been here, that the land was better for what I'd done to it." "Is it?" Clara asked. He thought about it honestly. "Better in some ways," he said. "Worse in others. I let some things go after Margaret died, things she had cared about more than I did, and I didn't realize how much I'd been doing them for her until she wasn't here to do them for any more." "Like what?" Clara asked. "The kitchen garden," he said. She'd had this whole plan for it. Spent years working at the soil on the east side of the house because it didn't drain right and she wanted to fix that. I let it go to weeds after she died." He paused. "I couldn't look at it. It seemed, I don't know, like tending it was a pretense, like I was pretending she was still coming back." Clara thought about her mother's garden in Indiana, the way she had let it die the summer after her mother passed, and the guilt she still carried about that. "I understand that," she said. He looked at her. "I know you do," he said. That's... He stopped. That's part of what I wanted to say. That I know you understand it. There aren't many people who do. Clara looked at the flat, open land ahead of them. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. When you sit on that bench on Fridays, she said carefully, and you watch the passengers, what are you actually feeling? Not what you think you should feel, what you actually feel. Thomas was quiet for several paces. In the beginning, he said, it was grief, pure and simple. I sat there because it was the last place where everything made sense, and I couldn't think of anywhere else to be. He paused. But grief changes. It doesn't go away. I think anyone who tells you it goes away is either lying or hasn't loved anybody properly, but it changes shape. Becomes something you carry differently. He thought about it. Now when I sit there, I feel I don't know. Present. Like I'm honoring something. Like the worst thing I could do to Margaret's memory is stop caring about the things she cared about, and she cared about... Another pause. She cared about me showing up. She always said the most important thing a person could do was show up, so I show up. Clara thought about this for a long time. She was right, she said. She usually was, Thomas said. When he brought her back to Martha Hale's boarding house that evening, they stood on the porch for a moment in the cold, and he said, Would you let me take you out to see the ranch sometime? Not immediately. When you're ready. I'm not in a hurry, she said. Are you? No, he said. I am not a man who hurries things. Good, she said. Neither am I. He touched the brim of his hat. Good night, Miss Bennet. Good night, Thomas. She went inside and stood in the hallway for a moment in the dark. Martha Hale appeared from the sitting room with the expression of a woman who had strong feelings and was exercising considerable discipline in not expressing all of them at once. Thomas Whitaker brought you home, she said. He walked me home, Clara said. Yes. Martha Hale looked at her for a moment. He's a good man, she said finally. A genuinely good man. She paused. I just want you to be careful. Careful of what? Clara asked. Martha Hale struggled with something. Clara could see it happening, the internal negotiation between what she wanted to say and what she was willing to actually say. Of hoping for things, Martha Hale said finally, that this town might not let happen. Clara looked at her landlady. She thought about Thomas's voice on the platform. They are poor judges of worth. Thank you for your concern. Mrs. Hale, she said pleasantly. Good night. She went upstairs and sat on her bed with the new account book in her lap and thought about the distance between what this town thought was possible and what she believed to be true, and she decided, as she had decided many times before, to trust her own arithmetic. The disease came in January. It did not announce itself. Diseases in cattle, rarely did they move through a herd the way bad news moved through a small town. First one animal, then two. Then, by the time you understood the shape of what was happening, the damage was already larger than you'd hoped. Thomas came to the station on a Tuesday morning, and Clara knew before he reached the window that something was wrong. Not from his expression, he did not wear trouble on his face easily, but from the quality of his stillness, which was different from his ordinary stillness. This was the stillness of a man holding something heavy. How bad? She said before he told her. He looked at her. 11 animals confirmed. I've isolated the east pasture, but if it's already in the water source, the isolation won't hold. What does Doc Hennessy say? He thinks it's bovine lung fever, possibly something else. Thomas put his hands on the window ledge. If it spreads to the full herd, I lose the year. Maybe more than the year. Clara looked at him steadily. What do you have in reserves? Not enough, he said. Not for a full herd replacement. Show me your ledgers, she said. Clara, Thomas, she said. Show me your ledgers. He brought them the following morning. 2 large books, worn at the corners. The handwriting inside shifting between his own and another hand she recognized as Margaret's from the early years. She spent 3 hours at the station window going through them between customers, and what she found was not a disaster, but it was close to one. Not because Thomas had been careless, but because a ranch run by one man, who was also managing grief for 6 years, had accumulated small inefficiencies. The way wood accumulated water gradually and invisibly until the rot was already deep. She found 3 supply contracts he was overpaying on. She found 2 labor arrangements that were disadvantageous compared to current rates. She found a pattern in his feed purchasing that cost him approximately 14% more per season than a different purchasing schedule would have. She wrote it all out in the new account book he had given her for Christmas, line by line, in the clean, precise handwriting her father had taught her. When Thomas came back that afternoon, she passed the book through the window. He read it slowly. She watched his face as he read. He got to the end and looked up at her, and there was something in his expression that she did not know how to interpret. It was too complicated, too layered, something that had to do with more than the numbers on the page. "Clara," he said. "It's a starting place," she said. "If you renegotiate the Garner contract first, you free up enough capital to cover the immediate veterinary costs without touching your emergency reserve." "That's not what I was going to say," he said. She looked at him. "I was going to say," he said carefully, "that I have not had anyone stand beside me like this in 6 years. And I don't know how to account for it properly." The station was empty. The freight clock ticked on the wall. Outside, the January wind worked at the eaves. Clara thought about what to say. Then she said the true thing. "You don't have to account for it," she said. "Just let it be what it is." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not good at that," he said. "I know," she said. "We'll work on it." Something crossed his face, startled, then something warmer. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose we will." He left with the account book. She watched him go, and the disease was still in the east pasture, and the January cold was still pressing through every gap in the station walls, and she still had no guarantee of anything. But the ground was still solid under her feet, and she was still standing on it. The following Friday, Thomas arrived at 3:44. He sat on the bench. Clara brought 2 coffees. She sat beside him, and something had shifted between them in a way neither of them named, but both of them felt the comfortable weight of 2 people who have seen each other in a difficult moment and not looked away. The train came. Thomas watched the passengers. The platform cleared. He did not rise immediately this time. He sat for a moment longer than usual, looking at the tracks, and Clara sat beside him and waited the way she had learned to wait, quietly, without filling the silence, trusting that the silence was doing something neither of them could do by talking. "I'm going to be all right," he said finally. Not to her exactly, or not only to her. "Yes," she said. "You are." He turned to look at her. "Because of you partly," he said. "Because of you mostly," she said. "I only organized what was already there." He held her gaze for a moment with an expression she had stopped trying to analyze and simply allowed herself to receive. Then he stood, straightened his hat, and walked back to his horse. She stayed on the bench. She sat where Margaret's husband had sat every Friday for 6 years, on the bench, where grief had made itself a home, and she thought that the most surprising thing about being seen, truly seen, was not the joy of it. It was the terror. Because once someone had looked at you properly, really looked, and had not looked away. The question you could no longer avoid was the one you had spent your whole life trying not to ask. What if this time it stays? She picked up the empty coffee cups and went back inside. She did not look at the tracks. She already knew the train was gone. But she also knew, in the precise accountant's way, she knew things when the numbers were honest and the ledger balanced, that something else entirely had just arrived. The disease did not stop at 11 animals. Thomas had known it wouldn't. He had isolated the east pasture and called Doc Hennessy out twice and done everything a man could do when he caught something early. But bovine lung fever had its own arithmetic, and it did not care about the preparations of ranchers who had already lost enough. By the 3rd week of January, the count was 23. By the end of the month, 31. He did not come to the station on the Tuesday of the 4th week. Clara noticed by 10 o'clock in the morning. By noon, she was certain something was wrong. By 3 o'clock, she had left a note with the freight clerk pulled on her coat and was walking the 2 miles south of town toward the Whitaker Ranch, because she did not own a horse and there was no one available to drive her, and she was not willing to wait until Friday to find out what had happened. She had never been to the ranch before. She had imagined it from his descriptions: the east pasture with its drainage problems, the west side where the feed ran better. The house Margaret had filled with a kitchen garden she'd wrestled from bad soil. She had imagined it the way you imagine a place you've only heard about from someone who loves it, which meant the reality was simultaneously more specific and less perfect than the picture in her head. What she found when she came over the last rise was a man standing outside his barn in the January cold without his coat on, which told her everything she needed to know about the state he was in before she was close enough to see his face. "Thomas," she called. He turned. He looked like he had not slept in 2 days. He probably hadn't. "You walked out here," he said. "You didn't come to town," she said. "What's the count?" He looked at her for a moment, with the expression of a man who has been alone with bad news long enough that being asked about it directly feels like both a relief and a wound. 37, he said. "I lost 6 more overnight." Clara stopped walking. 37 animals out of a herd of she did her arithmetic from memory, from the ledgers she'd spent 3 hours with in December. "How much of your operating revenue does that represent?" she asked. "Too much," he said. "Thomas, the number." He looked away. "Roughly 40% of this year's projected income. If it stops now, if it doesn't stop." He didn't finish the sentence. She crossed the remaining distance between them and held out her hand. "Give me your feed ledger," she said, "and your livestock insurance documents if you have them, and the Garner supply contract, all of it." He stared at her hand. "Clara, you walked 2 miles in January, and I will walk 2 miles back," she said, "after I have looked at your papers. Now, are you going to stand out here without a coat until you get lung fever yourself, or are we going to go inside and fix what can be fixed?" Something in Thomas's face shifted. The locked down, holding everything in expression that she had come to recognize as his response to pressure, it cracked. Not dramatically. Not with tears or raised voice or any of the obvious signifiers of a man at his breaking point. Just a small visible fracture like a seam in dry earth after a long drought. "Come inside," he said. The house was cold because he had let the fire run down, which told her he had been outside most of the day. She rebuilt it herself while he found the papers she'd asked for because she had grown up in a hardware store and knew how a damper worked, and because doing something useful with her hands gave her somewhere to put the feeling that was moving through her chest at the sight of this man's home. The care that was still visible in the bones of it, in the way the furniture was arranged and the curtains were hung in the kitchen garden. She could see through the east window that had gone to weeds, but had clearly once been something someone loved. Thomas laid the papers on the kitchen table. She sat down and began reading. He sat across from her and watched her read which she was aware of, but chose not to acknowledge, because she needed to concentrate, and also because the quality of his attention. Careful not pressing the attention of a man who trusted her to do what she said she could do was the kind of thing she needed to not think about directly if she was going to be useful. 20 minutes later, she looked up. "You have livestock insurance," she said. "Yes." "And the policy covers epidemic disease with a 60-day claim window." "I knew about the policy," he said. "I didn't think the losses would qualify as epidemic. 37 animals from a single disease source qualifies," she said. "I need you to send a telegram to the insurance agent in Dodge City tomorrow morning. I've written out what it should say." She slid the account book across the table with the message drafted in pencil. "The Garner contract renegotiation we discussed in December, that needs to happen this week, not next month. The savings there cover your immediate veterinary costs and the supplemental feed for the isolated animals." She tapped the supply contract. "And you are significantly overpaying for this. Garner is undercutting his own rates in Abilene by 20%. I have the Abilene freight schedule here." She slid another page across. "You can show him this." Thomas looked at the pages. He looked at them for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Did you carry all of this out here in your coat pocket?" "I've been carrying the relevant figures since December," she said. "I thought they might be needed sooner or later." He looked up at her. "You thought the disease might come," he said. "I thought something might come," she said. "It usually does. Thomas sat back in his chair and looked at her with an expression that had too many things in it for her to separate them cleanly. She did not try. She picked up the account book and began copying out the final version of the insurance telegram in ink instead of pencil. "Clara," he said. She kept writing. "Clara, look at me." She looked up. "Why are you doing this?" he said. It was not a suspicious question. It was not a challenging question. It was the question of a man who had been alone long enough that genuine help arrived, feeling like something he needed to identify carefully before he let himself rely on it. She thought about the true answer. "Because you showed up," she said. "Every Friday in every weather for 6 years. You showed up for something that most people would have given up on." She held his gaze. "I think a man like that deserves to have someone show up for him." Thomas did not say anything. She looked back down at the account book and finished the telegram. The silence in the kitchen was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who have said something real and are giving it room. When she stood to leave, Thomas rose too. "Let me ride you back to town," he said. "It's getting dark." "I know the road," she said. "Clara." His voice had something in it she had not heard before, not quite authoritative, but certain in a way that invited no argument. "Let me ride you back to town." She put on her coat. They rode back in the January dark, her on his horse, and him walking alongside, because he said the horse knew the road better than any instruction he could give it, and she thought that was probably not the real reason, but it was a graceful one. They did not talk much. The cold had the kind of clarity that made conversation seem like an interruption. When they reached Martha Hale's boarding house, Thomas took the horse's bridle and looked up at her. "Thank you," he said. "Send the telegram first thing," she said. "I will." A pause. "Clara, would you be willing to come out to the ranch on Sunday, not to look at ledgers?" He stopped, started again. "I want to show you Margaret's garden. The way it was from the plans she drew. I kept the plans." He said this last part with a kind of careful steadiness, as if he'd rehearsed it and wasn't sure how it would land. "I thought perhaps you might have some thoughts about whether it could be brought back." Clara looked at him in the dark. She understood what he was offering. Not just a garden. The decision to let something he had kept private become something shared. The decision to allow someone inside the part of the house he had not been able to tend. "I'll bring work gloves," she said. Something crossed his face that was the closest thing to undone she had seen from him. "Sunday then," he said. She went inside. She sat on the edge of her bed with her coat still on and her boots still laced, and held the account book in her lap, and thought that the most dangerous thing about Thomas Whitaker was not his grief, and it was not his silence, and it was not the 6 years of solitude that had hardened him into the shape of a man who did not need anyone. The most dangerous thing was that she was beginning to believe he might actually mean it. Every single word. The telegram to the insurance agent in Dodge City went out Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Thomas had renegotiated 2/3 of the Garner contract, which went better than expected, because Clara had been right about the Abilene rates, and Garner, when presented with the comparison in black ink, had the grace to look embarrassed rather than defensive. By Thursday evening, the disease had not spread to any new animals for 48 hours. Thomas came to the station Thursday evening, not for anything official, just to tell her. She was closing the freight ledger when she heard his boots on the platform. "No new cases today," he said through the window. She let out a breath she had been holding since Tuesday. "The isolation held," she said. "The isolation held." He put his hands on the window ledge. "And the insurance agent wired back this afternoon. The claim qualifies. He'll send an assessor next week." Clara nodded. "Good. That's very good." Thomas looked at her. "You saved the ranch," he said. "The ranch saved itself," she said. "I just read the papers." Clara. Thomas. They looked at each other through the window for a moment. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday," she said. He left. She closed the freight ledger, put on her coat, and walked home through the January dark, and she did not think about Denver or Indiana or any of the other places she had considered running to, because none of them were here, And here, impossibly, impractically, against every reasonable expectation she had carried into this territory, was where she wanted to be. Sunday was cold and clear, the kind of winter day that had no ambiguity about it. Thomas met her at the ranch gate. He was wearing his work coat instead of his good coat, which she took as a sign that this visit was real rather than performed, and she appreciated it more than a good coat would have been. He showed her the kitchen garden, last after the barn, and the east pasture, and the repaired fence sections, and the feeding rotation she had reorganized on paper, and that his men had implemented with. She was surprised and pleased to hear minimal complaint. The men were cordial to her in the careful way of people who were reserving full judgment but had decided to be respectful in the meantime. She accepted this as reasonable. The kitchen garden was in the far east corner of the house, protected from the worst of the wind. She could see what it had been. The raised bed frames were still there, old but solid, and the soil inside them had the particular compacted quality of earth that had once been well worked. Margaret had clearly understood drainage. The beds were angled slightly, and Clara could see the logic of it even under the January ground. Thomas stood beside her holding a roll of papers. He unrolled them. They were hand-drawn plans, detailed and exact in a handwriting she had not seen before. Not Thomas's straight, careful script. Something quicker, more animated, with notes in the margins that said things like this: "One gets afternoon sun, one needs less water than it looks, and the tomatoes go here." Thomas, not where you'd put them, which made Clara laugh before she could stop herself. "She annotated the plans," Clara said. "She annotated everything," Thomas said. "Our marriage contract, our deed, the recipe for cornbread that her mother gave her." He paused. "She said if something was worth writing down, it was worth commenting on." Clara looked at the garden plan. She looked at the beds. She thought about the soil, the drainage angles, the afternoon sun. Thomas had mentioned the east side received in spring. "Onions first," she said. "In March before the last frost. They go in the ground earlier than anything else, and they fix the drainage if the beds need it." She pointed. "These two beds on the south end, the way she's drawn them, they'll get the best light. Tomatoes there in late April. Squash along the east edge they'll spread, but they won't crowd the other beds if you give them the full corner." She traced the plan with one finger, not quite touching it. She knew what she was doing. Thomas watched her. "Yes," he said. "She did." "Would you want to restore it the way she planned it?" Clara asked carefully. "Or adapt it? Some of these varieties might not be available now, and the soil will need working before anything else." Thomas was quiet for a moment. She had learned by now to give his silences room. "I want to restore the bones of it," he said. "What she planned. But," he stopped, "I think she would not have wanted it to be a monument. She would have wanted it to be a garden." He looked at Clara. "She would have wanted someone to actually use it." Clara met his eyes. "Then we'll make it a garden," she said. Something moved through Thomas's face. Grief and something else. Something that was not grief. Something that was moving in the opposite direction from grief. And he looked down at the plans and rolled them back up carefully. "I haven't shown those to anyone," he said. "Those plans." "I know," she said. "I should have—" He stopped. 6 years is a long time to keep something rolled up in a drawer. "It's the right time now," she said simply. He looked at her. The wind came across the east field, and Clara felt it against her face, cold and honest, the way wind on open land was always honest. "Clara," Thomas said. "Yes." He had the rolled plans in both hands, and he was looking at her with the careful directness that she had learned was his version of saying something that cost him. "I am not a man who moves fast," he said. "I never have been. Margaret used to say I was the most deliberate person she had ever known, and she meant it as a complaint about half the time." A pause. "But I want you to know that what I feel, what I have been feeling since December, since before December, is not. It is not gratitude or loneliness or grief, finding somewhere to put itself." He held her gaze. "I want you to know that specifically." Clara looked at him. The cold was real. The ground under her boots was real. The garden plans in his hands were real. "I know," she said. "You know," he repeated. I know the difference, she said quietly, between a man who is using me for comfort and a man who sees me. She paused. You see me, Thomas. You have from the beginning. I noticed. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he held out his hand. Not romantically, or not only romantically, but in the simple way of a person offering steadiness on uneven ground. She took it. They stood in the January cold beside Margaret's garden with their hands together, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed saying yet, and both of them understood that some things were better built slowly. The talk started the following week. Clara had expected it. She had been expecting it since December, in the way you expect weather you can feel coming before you can see it. The question was never whether the town would talk. The question was what shape the talking would take. It took the shape of Helen Marsh. Helen Marsh was 34 years old, the daughter of the town's most established banker, and she had been, this was the phrase Clara heard repeated, with the significance of people who believed it mattered enormously, been acquainted with Thomas Whittaker for many years. She was slender, well-dressed, possessed of the particular ease that came from never having been made to feel she didn't belong somewhere. She came to the station on a Wednesday morning. She did not need a ticket. She approached the window in the manner of a woman who had considered what she was going to say, and had decided to say it graciously, which was its own kind of cruelty. Miss Bennet, she said. I'm Helen Marsh. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Miss Marsh, Clara said. I wanted to come by personally, Helen said, because I think you're a decent woman, and decent women deserve to be dealt with honestly. She arranged her gloves on the counter in a gesture that managed to be both casual and deliberate. Thomas Whittaker and I have known each other for a very long time. Our families are closely connected. My father and Thomas have business dealings. She paused. After Margaret passed, there was an understanding between our families. Nothing formal, you understand, but an understanding. Clara looked at her steadily. An understanding, she said. That when Thomas was ready, Helen said carefully, the natural progression would be expected. Clara said nothing. The silence made Helen's carefully assembled composure show one small stress fracture. I simply think, Helen said, that you deserve to know the fuller picture before. She waved one gloved hand. Before you invest yourself further in something that may not develop the way you're hoping. Clara looked at Helen Marsh for a long, quiet moment. She thought about what her mother had told her. There is not a single thing wrong with you. There is something wrong with anyone who makes you feel otherwise. She thought about Thomas in the January cold, holding out his hand. She thought about the garden plans with the margin note, the tomatoes go here. Thomas not where you'd put them. Miss Marsh, Clara said, I appreciate you coming by. Helen Marsh waited. I have a great deal of work to finish before the afternoon freight arrives, Clara said, but I'll be sure to keep what you've said in mind. It was dismissal without the vocabulary of dismissal. Helen Marsh was too well-bred not to recognize it. Her chin came up slightly. Of course, she said. Good day, Miss Bennet. She left. Clara looked at her freight ledger. The numbers were there steady and indifferent, requiring nothing from her except accuracy. She was accurate for 40 minutes without thinking about anything else. Then she put the ledger down and thought about what Helen Marsh had said, which she had not permitted herself to do while Helen Marsh was present because she needed her face to be neutral, and thinking about it made her face do things she could not control. An understanding between families. Thomas had never mentioned it, which meant either he did not think it was real, or he did not think she needed to know, or there was a third option she did not like the shape of. She thought about the account book he had given her for Christmas. The way he said her name, Clara, not Miss Bennet, not that name he'd given her out of courtesy. Clara, the name that meant something. She thought about his hand in the January cold. She made a decision. She would ask him, not accusingly, not with the anxiety of a woman who expected the worst. She would ask him the way she asked about ledgers directly, because direct questions deserved direct answers, and she had enough respect for Thomas Whittaker to believe he would give her one. He came that Friday at 3:45. She brought the coffee. She sat beside him. The train arrived and departed, and the platform cleared, and Thomas sat in the ordinary way. And then she said without preamble, "Helen Marsh came to see me Wednesday." Thomas went very still. Not the ordinary stillness. Something different. "What did she say?" he asked. "She said there was an understanding between your families, that after Margaret died, it was expected that you and she would—" Clara kept her voice level. "Eventually." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said with a precision that suggested he had thought about this situation before, even if not in this particular form. "Helen Marsh's father has believed that for approximately 5 years. Helen may also believe it. I have never said anything to either of them that should have produced that belief." "But you haven't told them otherwise," Clara said. "No," he said. "I have not." "Why?" Thomas turned to look at her. "Because until recently," he said, "it didn't seem to matter. I wasn't going to be what anyone expected me to be. Not Helen, not her father, not this town." He paused. "I was going to sit on that bench every Friday and go home alone, and that was the end of it." "And now?" Clara asked. The words sat between them in the cold air. Thomas looked at her with an expression that had nothing evasive in it. "Now it matters," he said, "and I will make that clear to Harold Marsh and to Helen before the week is out." Clara held her coffee cup. "You don't have to do that for me," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm doing it because it's the honest thing to do, because an honest man does not let a misunderstanding stand when correcting it might be uncomfortable." He held her gaze. "And because you deserve not to have that kind of shadow over something that should be—" He stopped. "Something that I would like to be clean." Clara looked at the empty tracks. Something had opened up in her chest, not painfully, but with the particular sensation of a room that has been kept closed too long and has just had its windows opened. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. They sat in the quiet for another moment. Then Thomas said, "She came to discourage you." "She came to inform me," Clara said. "She was very gracious about it." "Gracious," Thomas repeated with the particular flatness of a man who understood exactly what gracious meant in this context. "Extremely," Clara said. Thomas looked at the tracks and was quiet for a moment, and then he said something she had not expected. "Did it work?" She turned to look at him. He was looking at her with the careful directness she had come to know and trust, not pressuring, not performing, just asking a real question and waiting for a real answer. "No," she said. Something in his shoulders released. "Good," he said. The following Tuesday, Thomas rode to the Marsh Bank. Clara did not know exactly what was said. Thomas was not a man who narrated his own difficult conversations, and she did not ask him to. But she heard from Martha Hale, who had heard from Betty Calloway, who had the information from a source that would not be named, but was almost certainly the bank teller, that Thomas Whitaker had met with Harold Marsh for 20 minutes, and that he had been by all accounts very direct, and that Harold Marsh had come out of the meeting looking like a man who had received news he had not been prepared for, but could not in honesty argue with. Helen Marsh did not come back to the station. The town talked about it for a week with the enthusiastic efficiency of people who had been given fresh material. Clara let them talk. She had more important things to attend to. The insurance assessor arrived from Dodge City on the first Friday of February. He was a small, methodical man named Griggs, who wore a suit that was slightly too large for him and carried a leather satchel full of forms, and he spent 2 days at the Whitaker Ranch examining the dead animals and the remaining herd and the isolation records Thomas had kept with a thoroughness that clearly surprised him. "Your documentation is unusually complete," Griggs told Thomas on the second afternoon. He was looking at the organized file of dates and casualty records and treatment logs that Clara had helped Thomas compile the previous week. "Most ranchers don't keep records this detailed." "I had help," Thomas said. Griggs looked at the file again. "Professional help." "A very good accountant," Thomas said. He was looking at Clara when he said it, and she kept her expression neutral with some effort. Griggs approved the claim on the third day. The amount Clara had calculated it within 4% of what the assessor ultimately awarded was enough to stabilize the ranch through the end of the fiscal year and fund the purchase of replacement livestock in the spring. Thomas told her that evening, standing at the station window with his hat in his hands, which she had learned was the posture he took when something had moved him more than he intended to let show. "It came through," he said. "I know," she said. "What does Griggs put in his report?" He put. Thomas stopped. He looked down at his hat. He put that the documentation quality was the determining factor in the claim approval. That without it, the losses would have been categorized differently and the payout significantly reduced. He looked up at her. "Without what you did, Clara, I would have gotten less than half." Clara looked at him. "You would have figured it out," she said. "No," he said. "I would not have." He said it without self-pity, simply as a fact. "I am a good rancher. I am not a good accountant. And I spent 6 years not asking for help from anybody because—" He paused. "Because I didn't think I deserved it, maybe. Or because I couldn't figure out how to start." Clara was very quiet. "You deserved it," she said. "You deserve it." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I know that. Now." And the way he said it, not dramatically, not with the deliberate weight of a man making a speech, but with the simple certainty of someone who had worked something out for himself and arrived at a conclusion he trusted, was the thing that reached her deepest. Not the words. The certainty. She went home that evening and sat with the account book and thought about what it meant to be seen not as a solution to someone's problem, but as a person who had chosen to help. Thomas had never made her feel used. He had made her feel useful, which was a difference so significant that she had been carrying it around for weeks, turning it over, making sure she understood what she was actually holding before she let herself believe it was real. It was real. She was fairly certain it was real. Then the letter came. It arrived on a Thursday morning with a Denver postmark, and the handwriting on the outside was not Mrs. Whitmore's household handwriting. It was a man's script, formal and firm. She opened it at the window because she opened all her correspondence at the window. It was from a solicitor. It was about her father's hardware store. She had genuinely not known that her father had taken on a business partner in his last year, a man named Alderton, and that this man had a legal claim on 30% of the store's remaining assets, which her father's death had triggered, and which had been sitting in a legal dispute in Indiana for 11 months because no one had been able to locate her. They had located her now. The dispute required her to either return to Indiana to testify in person or sign a document authorizing a legal representative to act on her behalf, which would cost money she did not currently have. She read the letter twice. She folded it and put it in her coat pocket. She worked through the rest of Thursday with the efficiency of a person who has learned to contain a difficult feeling until she has a private place to examine it properly. That evening, she unfolded the letter and read it again, and thought about everything her father had built and the possibility that a man she had never met was going to take a piece of it, and there was nothing she could do about it from this distance. She thought about Indiana. She thought about the return. She thought about Willow Creek and the station and the kitchen garden and the account book with her name on the cover. She put the letter in the top drawer of her desk and did not go to sleep for a very long time. Friday came. Thomas arrived at 3:44. She brought the coffee. She sat beside him. She did not tell him about the letter. Not yet. The train arrived and departed. The platform cleared. Thomas rose to leave, and then he stopped and turned back to look at her with the careful attention she had come to rely on more than she had intended to. "Something's wrong," he said. It was not a question. She looked at him. She thought about the letter in the drawer. She thought about Indiana and the solicitor and the 30%, and what it would mean to leave even temporarily, even for something practical and necessary. She thought about what he had said on that very bench in December. "I don't want to spend the rest of my life losing someone who is standing right in front of me." "Not wrong," she said carefully. "Complicated." He waited. She looked at the tracks. "I'll tell you Sunday," she said, "when I come out to the ranch." Thomas looked at her for a moment longer, with the expression of a man who respected the answer she had given and did not like it very much. "Sunday," he said. He walked back to his horse. Clara sat on the bench for a long time after he left. The cold settled into the wood beneath her. The platform was empty in every direction. Far down the tracks, a light was moving a freight train coming from the east hours away, carrying things she did not know toward places she could not see. She held her coffee cup and thought that the hardest thing was not the trouble itself. The hardest thing was that she had only just arrived somewhere that felt like staying, and now a door had opened behind her that she had not known was there, and she did not yet know what walking through it would cost. She told him on Sunday. They were standing beside Margaret's garden when she did it. The bare beds still waiting for March, the rolled plans sitting on the porch rail where Thomas had left them, and she pulled the solicitor's letter from her coat pocket and held it out without preamble, because she had decided on the walk over that the only way to do this was directly the way she did everything that mattered. Thomas read it once. Then he read it again. She watched his face. He had the focused stillness of a man absorbing information and refusing to react until he had absorbed all of it. When he finished, he folded the letter along its original creases and held it out to her. "How long have you had this?" he asked. "Since Thursday," she said. "You sat on that bench with me yesterday and didn't say anything." "I wasn't ready Thursday," she said. "I told you Sunday." Thomas looked at her. "What does the solicitor want?" "Either my presence in Indiana to testify or authorization for a representative to act for me. The representative costs money I don't have available." She took the letter back. "If I don't respond within 30 days, Alderton's claim advances by default." "How much is the claim worth?" Thomas asked. 30% of my father's store assets," she said, "which after debts is not an enormous amount, but it was his. He built it from nothing, and this man walked in during the last year of his life when he was sick and tired and—" She stopped. She had not expected the feeling to be this sharp. She had thought she had prepared for this conversation, but the sharpness surprised her. "And I am not going to let Alderton take it without a fight." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "You're thinking about going back," he said. It was not an accusation. It was the statement of a man who had read the situation accurately and was waiting to hear what she would do with it. "I don't want to," she said. "But the alternative costs money I don't currently have, and the 30-day window—" "How much does the representative cost?" Thomas asked. Clara looked at him. "Thomas. How much?" She told him the figure. He nodded once. The nod of a man making a calculation and arriving at an answer he was prepared to act on. "I can cover that," he said. "No," she said immediately. "Clara. No." Her voice was firm in a way she had not entirely planned, but did not regret. "I am not going to take money from you. That is not—" She stopped. "That is not what this is. That is not what I want this to be." Thomas looked at her steadily. "What do you want it to be?" The question landed in the cold air between them, and she felt it the way you feel a question that is asking more than its words. She looked at the garden beds. She thought about her father's store and Alderton and the solicitor's firm handwriting and 30% of everything her father had built. She thought about Indiana and the return and the particular grief of going back to a place that used to be home and finding it only a place. "I want to fight it myself," she said. "I want to find a way that doesn't require me to leave and doesn't require me to accept something I haven't earned." Thomas was quiet. She could hear him thinking. She had learned to hear the quality of his silences. "Your father kept accounts," he said finally. She looked at him. "His ledgers," Thomas said. "From the store. Do you have them?" "I have the ones from his last 4 years," she said. "I've had them since—" She stopped. "They're at the boarding house. I use his handwriting to fall asleep sometimes." She said this last part before she realized she was going to, and then she could not unsay it. Thomas did not look at her with the expression she half expected, the softened, careful look of someone handling something fragile. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, which was directly and with complete attention. "If there are ledgers," he said, "there may be documentation that complicates Alderton's claim. A business partner in the final year of a sick man's life, taking 30%, that arrangement deserves scrutiny." He paused. "There are lawyers in Dodge City. One in particular who handled my deed dispute 3 years ago. He's sharp, and he charges fair rates." Another pause. "Will you let me make an introduction?" "No money." An introduction. Clara looked at him. An introduction. Not charity. Not rescue. A door opened by someone who had a hand on the handle she didn't. She thought about her mother's voice. There is not a single thing wrong with you. She thought about what it meant to let someone help without losing the thread of herself. An introduction, she said. Yes. Thomas nodded. Good. He picked up the garden plans from the porch rail. Now, onions in March, you said. What do we need to do to the beds before the ground warms? And just like that, they were back in the practical world, the world of soil and plans and things that could be done. And Clara felt the particular relief of being with a person who understood that sometimes the kindest thing was to set the hard thing down for a moment and talk about something real. The introduction happened the following Thursday. Thomas rode to Dodge City himself, a full day's journey, and came back with a letter of introduction to a lawyer named Calhoun and a preliminary opinion that based on Thomas's description of the situation. Alderton's claim had at least two significant vulnerabilities, one of which involved the manner in which a business partnership could be legally established during a period of documented illness. Clara read the letter at the station window, with Thomas standing on the other side of the glass, watching her face. He thinks we have a case, she said. He thinks you have a case, Thomas said. He wants to see the ledgers. She looked up from the letter. Thomas, she said, you rode to Dodge City and back in one day. The roads were dry, he said. That is not the point. I know what the point is, he said. He was looking at her with the expression she had stopped trying to categorize because it always contained too many things. Clara, let me do this. She held the letter. She thought about the one that mattered, the one she had been holding on to since the beginning, between being helped and being saved. Between someone standing beside you and someone lifting you because they did not trust your legs. Thomas had never treated her like she needed lifting. He had simply stood beside her and faced the same direction. Thank you, she said. It was a real thank you, not the one she used as a social instrument. He heard the difference, she could see it in his face. I'll send the ledgers to Calhoun this week, she said. I'll wire him that they're coming, Thomas said. She passed him the letter back through the window. Their fingers did not quite touch, but almost. February moved through Willow Creek with the particular determination of a month that knows it is almost the last of winter and intends to make itself felt. The cold was serious and steady, the kind that made the station pipes require checking every morning and the freight platforms icy in the early hours. Clara worked through it with the efficiency she had brought to everything since September: the tight schedules, the organized ledgers, the systems she had quietly rebuilt, because the systems she'd inherited had been held together with habit and goodwill and not much else. Aldous Prentice, the station master, had mentioned twice in the past month that the Dodge City office had noticed the improvement in their freight processing numbers. He mentioned it the way a man mentions things he is pleased about, but is not entirely sure how to credit. She was also shipping her father's ledgers to Dodge City, one volume at a time, with careful inventory letters, and the organized notes she had spent 3 evenings compiling cross-references to dates, to transactions, to the precise moments when Alderton's involvement appeared in the accounts, and the precise way it appeared, which Calhoun had responded to with a telegram that said simply, "This is exactly what I needed. Do not send the rest until I say." She was in the middle of compiling the 3rd inventory letter on a Wednesday morning when the station door opened and Helen Marsh walked in for the 2nd time. Clara set her pen down. She had been expecting this in a general way since Thomas's meeting with Harold Marsh. She had not known exactly what form it would take, but she had known it was coming the way you know weather that is still a day away. Helen Marsh looked different from the first visit, less prepared. There was something in her face that was not the manufactured grace of the first time, something more exposed, more real, and therefore more difficult to deal with. "Miss Bennett," Helen said. "Miss Marsh." Helen stood at the window and did not say anything for a moment. She was gathering herself. Clara waited. "My father had a conversation with Thomas," Helen said. "I know," Clara said. "Thomas told my father." She stopped. "He was very clear." "I believe he would be," Clara said. Helen looked at her. And for the first time, Clara saw something in Helen Marsh's face that was not hostility or performance or the gracious cruelty of a woman accustomed to having the room organized in her favor. She saw something simpler and considerably more human. She saw a woman who had hoped for something for a long time and had just been told clearly and finally that it was not going to happen. Clara understood that feeling. She understood it in a way she had not expected to standing on this side of the window. "I'm not going to apologize for caring about him," Helen said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her. "I want you to know that I'm not—" She stopped. "I'm not a villain in this. I just hoped for something." "I know," Clara said quietly. Helen looked at her. "Do you?" "Yes," Clara said. "I know what it is to hope for something and be told the shape of the world doesn't accommodate it." She held the woman's gaze. "I'm sorry it happened to you." Helen Marsh blinked. It was clearly not the response she had come prepared for. The silence stretched between them, not hostile, not comfortable, but honest in the way of two women who had both wanted the same thing, and one of whom was going to have to find a way to put that down. "He looks at you differently," Helen said finally. It was not said with bitterness exactly. It was said the way you say a true thing that hurts. "Than he's ever looked at anyone, since Margaret." Clara did not say anything. "I noticed it before my father's meeting," Helen said. "That's why I came to see you the first time. Not because I thought I could stop it." She smoothed one glove unnecessarily. "Because I thought if I could make you uncertain, maybe you'd—" She stopped. "It wasn't kind. I know it wasn't kind." "No," Clara said. "It wasn't." Helen nodded. She accepted this without argument. "I hope you're good to him," she said. He has been through a great deal. He deserves someone who is genuinely good to him." She turned to leave. "Miss Marsh," Clara said. Helen turned back. "He deserves someone who sees him," Clara said. "I do. I promise you that." Helen Marsh looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the dignity of someone who has conceded a real thing and intends to carry it gracefully. She left. Clara looked at the station clock. She sat with the feeling for a moment. The complicated feeling of a victory that had not been a fight of a door, closing on something that had never fully opened, of the particular weight of being the one who got what someone else wanted. Then she picked up her pen and went back to the inventory letter. The ground was still holding. The letter from Calhoun arrived in the third week of February, and it changed everything. Clara read it twice at the window, and then a third time in her coat by the stove in the back of the station where the light was better. Calhoun had found what he called a material deficiency in the partnership documentation. Alderton's claim rested on a signed agreement, but the agreement had been witnessed by a single party who, per Indiana state law applicable at the time of signing, did not meet the legal requirements for a valid witness. The claim was not airtight. With the ledger documentation, Clara had provided specifically the entries from her father's final 8 months that showed no evidence of Alderton's promised capital contribution. Calhoun believed the claim could be challenged successfully without Clara returning to Indiana in person. He wanted authorization to proceed. He named his fee. She sat with the number. It was more than she had. Not enormously more. She had been saving carefully since September, but more than she had by a meaningful margin. She was still sitting with it when Thomas came for his Tuesday telegram. She handed him the letter without saying anything. He read it. He read it again. "Calhoun knows what he's doing," he said. "I know," she said. "I've read his analysis 3 times. Can you cover the fee?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. He looked up from the letter. "How short?" he said. "Thomas? Clara." He set the letter on the counter. "How short?" She told him the amount. He did not hesitate. He reached into his coat and produced his personal ledger, the small one he carried for daily accounts, and wrote a figure and pushed it across the counter. "That covers the gap," he said. "I'm not going to. It's a loan," he said. "At no interest. Documented in whatever form you prefer. You'll pay it back from the settlement when Calhoun wins, which he will." He met her eyes. "This is not charity, Clara. It's a practical arrangement between 2 people who keep accurate accounts, and you know it." She looked at the figure. She looked at him. She thought about the distinction, always the same distinction between being lifted and being stood beside. He was not lifting her. I was handing her a tool. Documented, she said. In the account book, signed by both of us. Agreed, he said immediately. She opened the account book. She wrote the amount, the date, the terms. She signed it and pushed it through the window. Thomas signed it without reading it again, which she understood to mean he trusted her handwriting, which was its own kind of significant thing. Wire Calhoun today, he said. I'll do it this afternoon, she said. He tucked his ledger back in his coat. He started to turn. Thomas, she said. He turned back. She wanted to say something that was equal to the moment. Something that encompassed the loan and the introduction and the ride to Dodge City in one day, and the way he said her name, and the garden plans with the margin notes, and all of it, all of the accumulated weight of 5 months on that platform that had somehow become this. She did not have the words for all of it, so she said the center of it. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Thomas looked at her. She watched something move through his face, the careful layered face of a man who did not move fast and had good reasons for it, and she watched the last of something loosen in him. Some final held thing, some last piece of the wall he had built against exactly this kind of hoping. I know, he said. He left. She wired Calhoun that afternoon. March came and with it the first real warmth. Clara planted onions on the first Saturday of March, kneeling in Margaret's garden beds with her work gloves and a trowel, and the plants unrolled beside her, and Thomas worked the adjacent bed without speaking much, because they had discovered over the winter that they were both people who worked better in comfortable silence, which was the rarest and most valuable kind of compatibility. His ranch hands had learned not to comment on her presence. This had happened gradually, the way most things happened in the real world, not through any dramatic confrontation, but through the accumulation of ordinary moments in which Clara demonstrated that she was not a novelty or a temporary feature of the place, but someone who knew what she was doing and did it without requiring attention. Hector the head hand had asked her to look at the spring feed schedule 3 weeks ago. She had reorganized it in 20 minutes. He had not said thank you in words, but he had stopped failing to hold the barn door when she was carrying something which was the Hector equivalent of a speech. Thomas watched this happen with a quiet satisfaction. He expressed only in the particular. His posture changed when she was around, a loosening in his shoulders, a stillness that was ease rather than guardedness. She noticed it. She filed it in the ledger she kept of real things. The east bed is drier than it should be, she said, working the soil with the trowel. Even with the drainage angle. Margaret had the same problem, Thomas said. She used to bring water from the west cistern every other day in the early season. Every other day is too much labor for one person, Clara said. If we run a secondary channel from the cistern to the east corner, it doesn't need to be large, just enough to supplement the natural runoff. You solve it structurally instead of manually. Thomas straightened up and looked at the garden. He looked at it the way he looked at things he was actually considering, not the polite consideration of a man humoring a suggestion. Doyle knew irrigation, he said. Before he went to California, I never thought to ask him about the garden. Ask Hector, she said. He grew up in New Mexico. They know water management down there better than anyone on this frontier. Thomas looked at her. How do you know that? He said. Hector told me, she said. Last Tuesday when I was going over the feed schedule, he mentioned his family ran an orchard outside Santa Fe. She pressed a bulb into the soil. He was very matter-of-fact about it. I think nobody has asked him about it before. Thomas was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I don't think anyone has. She could feel him thinking not about the irrigation, or not only about the irrigation. You do that, he said. Do what? She asked. Ask people things, he said. Real things, and then remember what they said. She pressed another bulb in. It's not a special skill, it's just paying attention. It's rarer than you think, he said. She looked up at him. He was looking at her with the full weight of his attention, which was something she had learned to receive without looking away from, though it had taken practice. My mother taught me, she said. She said people tell you who they are if you ask the right questions and actually listen to the answer. She said most people never get asked the right questions. She was right, Thomas said. She usually was, Clara said, like Margaret. She said it without thinking, and then she heard herself say it and felt briefly uncertain, but Thomas did not flinch. He looked at the garden with an expression that was not grief, or not only grief, but something that encompassed grief and moved past it. Like Margaret, he agreed. They went back to work. An hour later. Half the east bed was planted, and the soil smelled like spring, and Hector had appeared from the direction of the barn and crouched at the corner of the bed to look at the drainage problem Clara had identified, and was now explaining in the practical and somewhat understated way of a man who did not waste words exactly how his family had managed water flow in New Mexico, which was exactly as applicable as she had guessed, and more detailed than she had hoped. Thomas stood back and watched his head hand, and his. He did not have a word for Clara yet, not an official one, though he was aware he needed one, aware that the absence of the word was beginning to be a different kind of statement than he intended. Talk about irrigation channels with the efficient engagement of two people who spoke the same language. He felt something he had not expected to feel standing in this garden. Something like a future. Not the vague, obligatory future. He had been maintaining the one where the ranch continued, and the Fridays continued, and the years passed with the decent emptiness of a man who had decided that was enough. A real future. One with people in it. One with noise and problem-solving, and someone's work gloves left on his porch rail, and someone's handwriting in the margins of his records and onion bulbs pressed into the east bed, where Margaret had struggled with the drainage for years. I was not sure when it had happened. He thought it might have been that first rainy Friday, or the Christmas gift, or the day he rode to Dodge City. He thought it might have been the moment she walked 2 miles in January without a horse because he hadn't come to town and she wanted to know why. I thought, and this was the most honest accounting, that it might have started on a Wednesday afternoon in September when he had come to the ticket window for a Tuesday telegram and stayed longer than the transaction required, talking about fence posts, and had driven home thinking about the particular way Clara Bennett listened, which was with her whole attention and no part of herself held back for performance. He had not recognized it then. He recognized it now. Calhoun's second letter arrived in the last week of March, and it was everything his first had promised. Alderton had withdrawn the claim. Not willingly. The letter made clear that Calhoun had pressed the documentation deficiencies with the particular precision of a lawyer who enjoyed this kind of fight, but completely, and with a settlement provision that returned to Clara's estate the legal costs her father had incurred in the original partnership agreement, which Calhoun had characterized in a letter to Alderton's representation as evidence of predatory intent and been entirely correct. Clara read the letter at the station window on a Tuesday morning and sat very still for a long time. The store was hers. What remained of it, the assets, the name, the accounts her father had kept in that careful handwriting she had been carrying around for months, was hers. She wired Calhoun a reply that was professional and appropriate. Then she put her head down on the counter for approximately 30 seconds and did not move. When she lifted her head, 2 passengers were waiting at the window with slightly uncertain expressions. She sold them their tickets and gave them their receipts with perfect efficiency. She thought her father would have found the whole thing very satisfying. When Thomas came that afternoon, she told him before he reached the window. Alderton withdrew, she said. Thomas stopped walking. When? He said. This morning, she said. Calhoun's letter arrived on the early freight. She held it up. He won. Thomas crossed to the window. He read the letter with the focused efficiency of a man who had been waiting for this news and wanted to be certain he understood it correctly. He lowered the letter. Your father built something worth protecting, he said. Clara felt the back of her throat tighten. Yes, she said. He did. Thomas laid the letter on the counter between them. Clara, he said. She looked at him. He had the hat-in-hands posture she had learned to read, the posture that meant something was costing him. I want to ask you something, he said. And I want you to know that whatever you say, nothing changes. The Fridays don't change. The garden doesn't change. This doesn't... He stopped, started again. You don't owe me an answer that you don't mean. She looked at him steadily. Ask me. He looked at her across the counter with the full directness of a man who had decided that deliberate did not have to mean afraid. "Would you allow me to court you properly?" he said. "Formally, with whatever that requires. Church Sundays and chaperoned visits and calling on you at Mrs. Hale's with her sitting in the front room pretending not to listen." The corner of his mouth moved. All of it. Clara looked at him. She thought about September and the rainy platform and 2 miles in January and Christmas morning and a kitchen garden and irrigation channels and the account book with her name on the cover and the loan documented in her own handwriting, signed by both of them, and all of it. The whole accumulated weight of a winter's worth of two people learning who the other one was and not looking away. She thought about her mother's voice. She thought about what it felt like to be seen. "Mrs. Hale," she said, "has been hoping you would ask since December. She will be insufferable about it." Thomas looked at her. "Is that a yes?" he said. "That is a yes," she said. He reached through the window and took her hand and held it for a moment, not dramatically, not performing it, just holding it with the calm certainty of a man who had made a decision he trusted. Then he let go. He straightened his hat. "Sunday," he said. "Sunday," she said. He walked back to his horse. She stood at the window and watched him go, and she did not try to contain what she was feeling, because there was no practical reason to contain it. The station was empty. The afternoon was warm for the first time in months. The onion bulbs in Margaret's garden were already sending up their first thin green lines. She thought, "I am going to be all right." She thought, "I have been all right for a while. I just needed to know I was allowed to say so." She picked up the account book. She turned to the loan entry, the precise figure, the date the terms signed by both of them, and below it in the same clean handwriting she wrote, "Paid in full, March 28, 1887. And below that, because it was true, and because her father had taught her that a ledger should be honest with interest too large to calculate. She closed the book. She went back to work, outside down the South Road. Thomas was riding back to his ranch and the garden and the winter that was finally ending. And somewhere in the account book, her father had taught her to keep a column that had been running at a loss for a very long time, had quietly without announcement turned to something different. Not profit exactly. Something better than profit. Something that balanced. Spring came to Willow Creek, the way it always did on the Kansas frontier. Not gently, not gradually, but all at once, like a decision that had been held too long and finally released. One week, the ground was iron hard, and the wind had teeth, and the next week the air smelled like wet earth, and the first green things were pushing through the garden beds with the stubborn confidence of living things that knew their time had come. Clara noticed it first in the onions. She came out to the ranch on a Saturday morning, and there they were, thin green lines standing up from the east bed, like small declarations exactly where she had pressed the bulbs in March, exactly where Margaret's plan had said they should go. She stood at the edge of the bed and looked at them for a long moment without speaking. Thomas came out of the barn and saw her standing there. "They came in Tuesday," he said. "I was going to tell you Friday." "Why didn't you tell me Tuesday?" she said. "Because I wanted to see your face when you saw them yourself," he said. She looked at him. He looked back with the expression she had stopped trying to analyze 6 weeks ago, and had simply started receiving the one that had too many things in it to name individually, but that she had learned in the aggregate meant something she trusted completely. "They're crooked," she said, turning back to the bed. "The third row. They came in crooked. They're onions," he said. "They don't need to be straight." "Margaret's plan has them straight," she said. "Margaret's plan," Thomas said, coming to stand beside her, "also has a note in the margin that says the onions will do what they want regardless, so don't argue with them." Clara looked at the plans he was holding. She found the note. She pressed her lips together to stop the smile, and failed completely. "She was right," Clara said. "She was always right about the garden," Thomas said. "She was wrong about a lot of other things, but the garden she understood." They stood side by side, looking at the crooked onions in the early April morning, and Clara thought that this was one of the things she had not expected about loving Thomas Whitaker, the way Margaret's presence in the place was not a weight or a shadow or a competition, but simply a fact, like the drainage angle of the east bed, or the way the west cistern fed the property. Margaret had been here. She had known things. She had been right about the onions. All of that was true, and none of it diminished what was also true, which was that Clara was standing here now in the same garden, in the same morning light, and she was also right about the onions, and she was also here. Two true things could occupy the same space. She had learned that this winter. Thomas came to church with her that Sunday for the third time since he had asked to court her properly, and the town which had been processing this development with the thorough efficiency of a community that considers itself the appropriate authority on its members' personal lives was still in the adjustment phase that Clara had privately categorized as almost there, but not yet comfortable. They were getting there. Reverend Mills had shaken Thomas's hand after the second Sunday with the expression of a man who had decided he approved, which carried weight in Willow Creek, because Reverend Mills's approval was one of the currencies that mattered. Betty Calloway from the dry goods store had begun greeting Clara with a warmth that was still slightly effortful, but was at least genuine in its effort, which Clara counted as progress. Old Doc Hennessy had stopped her on the street 2 weeks ago and told her with the directness of a man who had been alive long enough to say true things without preamble that she had done Thomas Whitaker more good in 6 months than 6 years of well-meaning townspeople, and that he was glad she'd had the nerve to sit down on that platform in the rain. "I wasn't feeling particularly nervous," she had told him. "The brave ones never are," he said. "That's the whole point." Martha Hale had been insufferable about it, exactly as Clara had predicted, not unkindly, but with the enthusiastic investment of a woman who had watched the courtship develop from inside the same building and felt herself to be in some proprietary way a participant. She asked questions that Clara answered selectively and with patience, and she pressed Thomas's hand warmly every time he came to the door, and she sat in the front room during their visits with the determined innocence of a woman who was absolutely not listening and was very good at it. Thomas endured this with the graceful tolerance of a man who had made his peace with certain necessary inconveniences. The Sunday after the onions came in after church, and the walk home, and the brief visit at Martha Hale's, that was becoming a ritual of its own. Thomas walked Clara back to the station. She had afternoon freight to log, and stopped at the platform where they had sat through a winter's worth of Fridays. He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "What?" she said. "I was looking at the bench." The second bench from the east side, the one closest to where the first-class car stopped. Worn wood iron legs, the particular patina of a thing that had been outside through many seasons. "I've been thinking," he said. "About the bench," she said. "About Fridays," he said. She waited. He turned to look at her. "I want to keep coming," he said. "I want to keep coming on Fridays, but I want—" He stopped. He had the hat and hands posture. "I want to come for a different reason. I want it to be about something that's here, not something that's gone." He looked at the bench. "I don't know if that makes sense." "It makes complete sense," she said. "I don't want to stop," he said. "Coming here. That feels wrong too, like I'm discarding something." "You're not discarding anything," she said. "You're adding to it." She looked at the bench and then at him. "Margaret started the Fridays. You kept them because she mattered. You come now because this place matters, and the reasons it matters have grown." She held his gaze. "That's not loss. That's the opposite." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "How do you do that?" he said. "Do what?" "Say the thing," he said. "The exact right thing, without any performance in it." "I learned it from a man who does the same thing," she said. Thomas looked at her. She looked back. "Come on Friday," she said. "Bring coffee this time. Let me sit on that bench and have someone bring me coffee for once." The corner of his mouth moved. "That," he said, "I can do." He came that Friday at 3:42, and he had 2 cups of coffee, and he sat on the bench and put 1 cup on the far end, and she came out from the station and sat beside him and took the cup, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. The train arrived at 4:12. The passengers stepped off a family, a merchant, 2 women in traveling clothes, an older man with a cane. Thomas watched them cross the platform with the attention she had seen every Friday for 8 months. She watched him watch them. Then he looked away from the passengers. He looked at her, and he smiled, not the small cautious expression she had come to treasure, but a full, real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and changed the whole arrangement of his face, and told her plainly that whatever he had been looking for when he watched those passengers step off the train, he was not looking for it out there anymore. She felt it reach her in the place she generally kept locked. She let it. "You're not watching them," she said. "No," he said. 6 years, she said. 6 years, he agreed. The platform cleared. The train departed. They sat in the April afternoon with their coffee, and Clara thought that some things ended so quietly you almost missed it. Not with grief or ceremony, but with a cup of coffee and a smile, and the simple weight of a present moment that was finally enough. It was the following Wednesday that the thing happened, which Clara would later think of as the moment the town finally made up its mind. She was at the station window when she heard it raised voices outside in the street, the particular quality of public confrontation that made everyone in a small town look up and calculate their distance from the trouble. She came out of the station. 3 men she did not know well, hands from one of the outlying ranches in for supplies, were standing outside the dry goods store. The largest of them was saying something she could not hear fully, but she caught the words, and she caught the direction of it, which was toward Clara herself, who had apparently committed the offense of existing on the same street while being the size she was. It was not the first time. She had been navigating this particular kind of cruelty her entire life, and she knew how to do it. The contained expression, the kept straight spine, the decision to let it land without letting it show, because showing gave people more of what they wanted. She was 3 steps back toward the station door when she heard Thomas's voice. She had not known he was in town. She had not known he was there at all until she heard his voice, and it was a voice she had never heard him use, which was saying something because she had spent 8 months learning the range of him. This was the voice of a man who has seen something he considers completely intolerable and has decided to address it without any of his usual deliberateness. "Excuse me," Thomas said. The 3 men turned. The largest one started to say something. "I heard what you said," Thomas said. He walked toward them with the particular steadiness of a man who is not angry in the reactive sense, but is angry in the deeper, colder sense that is considerably more alarming. "I want you to say it again, clearly, so everyone on this street can hear it, and so you can hear yourself." The man did not say it again. "That woman," Thomas said with a precision that turned each word into something with weight and edge, "manages the freight accounts for this station better than anyone who has held that position in the 12 years I've been coming through here. She saved my ranch this winter through work that most men in this territory couldn't have managed. She is a person of more intelligence and more character than I have seen assembled in one human being in a very long time." He stopped 2 feet from the largest man and looked at him with the expression that had ended Chester Howell's commentary 17 years ago and had not lost any of its effectiveness. "And she is being courted by me, which means that what you just said, you said about someone who is mine to defend." A pause. "I won't ask you to apologize to me. I'm asking you to apologize to her." The street was very quiet. Clara stood at the station door. She was aware of Betty Calloway frozen outside the dry goods store, of Doc Hennessy stopped on the opposite sidewalk, of the freight clerk behind her not moving. The largest man looked at Thomas. He looked at Clara. "Ma'am," he said, "I apologize." It was not generous. It was not warm. But it was said in front of the street, in front of everyone, out loud, and without qualification, and Clara looked at him and nodded once. "Thank you," she said. The 3 men left. The street exhaled. Thomas turned to look at her. She looked at him. She thought about her father's voice. A woman who can't manage her own money is a woman at someone else's mercy. She thought about how she had spent her life making sure she was never at anyone's mercy, never needing rescue, never the woman who required a man to stand in the street and say she was worth defending. She thought about the difference between needing rescue and being chosen. Thomas had not rescued her. He had stood beside her and faced the same direction the way he always did. And he had done it in public in the middle of a Wednesday in April, in front of every person on that street without being asked. She walked toward him. She said quietly enough that only he could hear, "That was not necessary." "No," he agreed. "It was not necessary." He looked at her steadily. I wanted to. She looked at him. Thomas Whitaker, she said. You are the most deliberately infuriating man I have ever known. I have been told that, he said. You did not have to do that. I am aware. I was managing fine. You were managing perfectly, he said. You always manage perfectly. That is not the point. What is the point? She said. He looked at her with the full weight of everything. He was 6 years of grief and 20 years of building something from nothing, and all the Fridays and the rolled garden plans, and the account book with her name on the cover, and the loan she had paid back, and the insurance claim, and the telegram to Dodge City, and all of it, every last accumulation of who Thomas Whitaker was and had chosen to be. The point, he said, is that you don't have to manage alone, not anymore. Clara stood on the street in the April morning and felt the truth of that reach every part of her that had ever believed otherwise. She did not cry. She was not that kind of woman, and she had no intention of starting now. But she reached out and put her hand on his arm, briefly, firmly. The way you touch something real to confirm it is there. Come for supper Sunday, she said. I'll cook. At Mrs. Hale's, he said. At your ranch, she said. I know where the kitchen is. He looked at her. You know where everything is, he said. Yes, she said. I do. She went back into the station. The twist arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late April in the form of a letter with a Dodge City postmark that was not from Calhoun. It was from the railroad company, specifically from the regional operations director of the Kansas Pacific Line, a man named Harlow, who had apparently been reviewing the freight processing improvements across the territory's stations and had identified Willow Creek as having the most significant efficiency gains in the past fiscal year, and who wanted to know if the station master would be available to discuss the methods used with a view to implementing them across the broader network. Clara read the letter 3 times. Aldous Prentice read it twice, and then looked at her with the expression of a man who understood precisely what had happened. This is your work, he said. It's station work, she said. Clara. He set the letter down. Every number in this letter is your work. Harlow wants to know how we did it. The answer is you. She looked at the letter. What does he want? She said. I wants a meeting, Prentice said. In Dodge City, with whoever made these improvements. He paused. He mentions the possibility of a regional position, overseeing freight operations across 6 stations. The words landed with the weight of something significant. A regional position. 6 stations. Dodge City. Clara stood at the window and thought about what that meant. The salary, the scope, the recognition that she had spent 27 years watching be extended to men who had done less careful work with less consistent results. She also thought about the ranch and the kitchen garden and the Friday bench and Thomas's hand in the cold January morning. She thought about all the times she had run from a place because it hadn't been safe to stay, and the fact that this was the first place she had ever stayed because she wanted to. She told Thomas that evening when he came to the window. He read the letter without comment. He read it again. He set it on the counter. What do you want to do? He said. She looked at him. I want to know what you think, she said. I think, Thomas said carefully, that you are the most capable person I have ever known, and that a railroad company offering you a regional position has done so because they have looked at numbers that don't lie and understood what those numbers mean. He paused. I also think that what you want and what I want are not separate questions, not anymore. She looked at him. Dodge City is a day's ride, she said. I know where Dodge City is, he said. A regional position might require travel, she said. I know what regional means, he said. She held his gaze. Thomas, say what you're thinking. He put both hands on the counter. He looked at her with the directness that had never wavered not once from the first rainy Friday to this April evening. I am thinking, he said, that I have a proposal I intended to make on a specific occasion that I had planned rather carefully, and that this letter has moved the timeline, and I am trying to decide whether to let it move the timeline or whether to hold to the plan. Clara went very still. A proposal, she said. A proposal, he confirmed. Thomas Whitaker, she said. Her voice was entirely steady. She was proud of it. If you have something to say to me, say it. He reached into his coat. He produced a ring. It was not elaborate. It was a simple band with a small stone, the kind of jewelry a man chose when he wanted something that would last, rather than something that would impress. She could see from the quality of it that he had not bought it last week. He had been carrying it for longer than that. I have been thinking about how to say this correctly for approximately 2 months, he said. I have rejected 11 different versions because they were either insufficient or overwrought, and I am neither of those things. He looked at her. So I am going to say it plainly. Clara Bennett, you walked onto a rainy platform and sat beside a stranger and asked the right question, and you have not stopped being exactly who you are from that moment to this one. I want to be the person beside you for the rest of my life. Not because I need you to save me, or because I am lonely, or because grief found somewhere comfortable to rest. Because you are the most real thing I have found in 6 years, and I am not willing to let you go to Dodge City or anywhere else without making it completely clear that wherever you go, I want to go with you. He paused. Will you marry me? Clara looked at the ring. She looked at him. She thought about September and the rain and the photograph of Margaret laughing. She thought about the coffee on the bench and Christmas morning and the account book and the garden plans with the margin notes and 2 miles in January and the onions coming in, crooked, and a Wednesday morning on a street in April when he had stood beside her and faced the same direction without being asked. She thought about what it felt like to be seen, to be actually fully, unambiguously seen, not despite who she was, not in spite of her size or her history, or the years of accumulation that had made her careful and competent and quietly lonely, but because of it, all of it, the whole person. Yes, she said. Thomas released a breath he had clearly been holding. She reached through the window and took the ring from his hand, and he watched her put it on with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he had not been certain he would reach and finds that it is exactly what he hoped. The Dodge City meeting, she said. We'll go together, he said. I have business in Dodge City. I always have business in Dodge City. Thomas. Clara. You have no business in Dodge City. I will by Thursday, he said. She looked at him. He looked back with the absolute calm of a man who has made a decision and intends to stand by it. She thought about all the ways she had spent her life being managed, being redirected, being diminished, being told the shape of the world did not accommodate her. She thought about how different this was, how he was not managing her. He was simply refusing to be left behind, which was an entirely different thing, and one she found she had no argument against. The meeting is at 2 o'clock, she said. We'll leave Thursday morning, he said. We'll be back by Saturday. We are not yet married, she said. Mrs. Hale will have opinions. Mrs. Hale, Thomas said, has had opinions since December. I believe she has earned the right to have a few more. Clara pressed her lips together. She failed to suppress the smile. Thursday morning, she said. Thursday morning, he said. He touched the brim of his hat. He left. She stood at the window and looked at the ring on her hand, which was a real thing, solid and present, and not going anywhere. She opened the account book. She turned to the last written page. The loan entry paid in full, with interest too large to calculate, and below it she wrote the date, and below the date she wrote a single line because her father had taught her that a ledger should be honest and that the most important entries were the ones that changed the meaning of everything before them. She wrote everything from here forward balanced. She closed the book. The following Friday, Thomas came to the station at 3:42. He brought 2 coffees. He sat on the second bench from the east side. Clara came out of the station and sat beside him and took the cup he handed her, and they were quiet in the warm April afternoon, in the way of 2 people who have nothing to prove to each other and do not need to fill the silence with anything. The train arrived at 4:12. Passengers stepped down onto the platform. A young couple, a woman with a child, a merchant with sample cases, an older man moving carefully with a cane. They crossed the platform and disappeared into the street and the station and the town, carrying their lives with them, arriving and departing. The way people had always arrived and departed at this station, the way they would continue to do long after today. Thomas watched them. Clara watched Thomas. She watched his face as the platform cleared, the careful attention, the quietness, the quality of presence that had always been the most important thing about him. And she watched the moment when he stopped watching the passengers and turned to look at her instead. He was not looking for anything out there anymore. She could see it plainly. 6 years of Fridays. 6 years of watching every face that stepped off the afternoon train. 6 years of sitting in every weather on the same wooden bench, because it was the last place where he had felt chosen, and it had ended. Not with a ceremony, or a declaration, or a dramatic moment on a rainy platform, but quietly in the ordinary warmth of an April afternoon, with 2 cups of coffee and a woman beside him who had sat down one rainy Friday and asked the right question and never left. "Thomas," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at the empty tracks. Then she looked at him. "She would have liked this," she said. "Margaret, she would have been glad." Thomas was quiet for a moment. She felt him consider it honestly, the way he considered everything, with the full weight of his attention and no part of himself held back. "Yes," he said. "She would have." He put his arm around her there on the bench in full view of anyone who happened to be on the platform, with no concern whatsoever for who saw or what they thought. Clara leaned into him. The platform was warm. The afternoon was bright. Somewhere down the tracks a freight train was moving west through the Kansas territory, carrying things she did not know toward places she could not see, and it did not matter because she was not on it, and she had no intention of being on it, and the bench beneath her was solid and real, and had been waiting through all of it, through all 6 years of grief, and all 8 months of coffee, and all of the winter, and the disease, and the letters, and the garden, and the Wednesday morning on the street, and the ring, and the account book, and everything for exactly this. For a man who had finally stopped looking at the train, and a woman who had finally arrived somewhere she intended to stay. Thomas Whitaker had waited at that station every Friday for 6 years, and in the end, the person worth waiting for had not stepped off a train at all. She had walked out of the station and sat beside him and asked who he was waiting for, and the answer from that rainy afternoon forward had always been her.